Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're from. I'm Lori Medford. I'm going to be your presenter today for FlexiWave Drapery session number 1. It is June 14th, which I cannot believe it's already June. And I'm going to be walking you through in this class, making the drapery that you see in the front window of Workroom Tech. If you have any questions throughout, you can always use the chat button. If you have questions after class or before our next class, my email is on the screen for you. So what's included in this section, I'm going to do an overview of wave drapery. And then I'm going to talk about, in that overview, I'm going to talk about some different companies and different styles of wave that are available to you. We're going to pre-plan and measure the window. We're going to show how to work with sheer material. I'm going to tell you today 2 different ways to figure your fullness. And then in session 2, I have yet another way, just in case you have already a panel that's made that someone wants turned into a wave drapery. So that will be in session 2. We'll figure yardage today. We're going to plan the cuts and start into making the panel, but we will not finish the panel today. So these are some supplies that you're going to need. Now this class does not have a kit, and you are not expected to make a full class project. But you should be comfortable enough with making a wave drapery when we're done with the class. So it's going to be up to you whether you decide to jump in or not. If you do jump in, you'll definitely need something to measure with, and that's both measure the window and your fabric. Scissors, your cutting table, at least room for a large piece of fabric. Iron pins, table clamps. I'm going to show you how to cut multiple layers of shears at one time. So that's where the clamps are going to come in. You'll need some kind of sewing machine with a straight stitch, needles and thread, or fusible tape if you'd rather than close your hems by hand or by machine. We're going to use a bead weight chain in our actual hem, and then transparent buckram, completely optional. I did one sample with buckram, one sample without buckram. Other things you're going to need if you want to do this particular project is the DoFix APS tracking components. And I'm going to specify all that out in session number 2. And I also have a starter kit available as students available to you from DoFix that will have everything you need in it to make samples for using their actual wave or FlexiWave materials. You will need a saw to cut metal because, as you know, most places when you order your track aren't going to cut it exactly how you want it. So you'll need to be able to cut that, and probably a file along with that to get rid of sharp edges. It wouldn't be bad to have a set of hex keys. One will come with some of your components, but it's never bad to have a set of those just laying around. You need screwdrivers and screws because otherwise you're not going to get this thing on the wall. You need some kind of ladder, depending where you're going to install it, or if you're going to install it, obviously a measuring tape to measure the window, and then some kind of marker, just a pencil to be able to mark where your brackets are going to go. That sounds like a whole bunch of stuff, but really making this type of drapery is not hard at all. It is one of the easiest things to do. Don't tell your customers that though, because you still want to charge them a lot of money for it. A wave drapery is just what it says it is. It's a style of panel that goes from the front to the back, looks like little waves, and it has a projection, something that we call a projection. And that definition is the amount from the middle of the track to the front or the amount from the middle of the track to the back. Now, the thing you have to keep in mind is if you put more fabric under your track or more fullness, your projections are going to be greater. So you're going to have the opportunity. You could do 4 times fullness if you want to, but the problem is your waves are going to be so deep in the front and back that you may start rubbing on some kind of window trim or the glass of the window. So you'll want to know what projection room you have available, and that may tell you what fullness you're going to do. We're working a little bit backwards there. You can hang a wave drapery on rings. You can put it on a decorative rod, or you can use the tapes and clips that I'm going to show you in just a minute. You can even do a wave drapery called ripple fold, and that has a snap tape that you sew in and a track system. Now, I will tell you, kind of a forewarning, not all tracks fit all tape systems. And by systems, I mean the carriers and maybe the pins that go into the particular tape. So if this is your first time doing a wave drapery, stick with one company. If you're going to order from DoFix, plan on doing all the components from DoFix, because then you're guaranteed that they will all fit. Now, some systems have a set fullness and you don't get to change that. Others let you choose the fullness. DoFix lets you choose the fullness. Some have a standard 4-inch header or a 3.5-inch header. Others have a 1-inch header. So using buckram is completely optional and up to you. It depends on maybe how much spring back you want. Spring back is when you close your drapery and then it kind of relaxes back open a little bit. With buckram, it will do that, but it will also help keep the folds running top to bottom a little bit more crisply if you do use buckram. We're going to use the DoFix system. Like I said, we're going to use the FlexiWave fusible tape. We're going to use a set spaced flexi clip carrier. That is a mouthful and a half to say 3 times fast. What that means is the carriers have a cord between them in a set spacing. And then we're going to use the flexi pins that are part of that full system with an APS track, and we're going to wall mount that. It will be a fully functioning center draw panel. It will move with baton. The only trick that we have is this has to go around a corner. My particular project had to go around a corner, and the customer did not want the small short sides to move. They wanted those to be stationary and just the middle part to move. So I had to add a few track stops here and there, but I'll go through that when we do the installation. So this is an example of a wave drapery that is on decorative rings on a decorative rod. And these rings probably either have a clip or they have some type of round eyelet on them, and you would sew them on by hand. It may be that they used a wave tape. Now, this is a wave tape that you can buy from a couple different resources. It comes flat to you. You need to pay attention to what the fullness is on this tape. And then what you do is you gather that back kind of 1-inch braid on the back. You gather the middle of that to give yourself the wave pattern. Here's the downside of this tape. There's no way to stop the relaxing of that gathered area. Once it's gathered, it doesn't stay there unless you hand tack it to stay. So to me, that's kind of a pain to do because you not only have to put your tape on, but you have to gather and then you have to do something to keep those gathered areas consistent. The other thing is that this tape runs under the track. So there's really no back projection behind the track, but it is an option for a wave drapery. Here's more like what we're going to use today, except this is a thicker, crisper buckram feel to the tape. It does give you a full wave front and back projection. It does have a set spacing on it, but I'm quite sure there's some kind of customer out there that has it with little pockets that you can choose your own spacing with, kind of like the DoFix one. And then the last one that we are not covering at all today is going to be the ripple fold tape. I'm not covering ripple fold because that is a whole nother education unto itself and will not fit into my little 1-hour class. So ripple fold tape has snaps on it. And what you do is you sew that to your drapery header and it gives you a wave front and back projection. So a true wave with a 1-inch header on it rather than a 4-inch header. So nice clean look. A little more math involved with ripple fold, a lot more extensive math, I should say, not a little bit, but a lot more extensive math involved. But basically, you're going to make the panel the same way. So we are going to use a tape somewhat like the one that is shown on the top right. That is not a DoFix tape and is not a DoFix track, but ours is going to look very much like that. So you've probably seen this slide before if you've taken a class from me or from Susan, and I can't tell you how vital it is that you do this. You absolutely must measure your window. And it's not for the basics of knowing how to measure a window and measuring above the window and to the side of the window and all that. It's basically for measuring where your rod's going to go, and then where from the bottom of the rod down, how long your window treatment is going to be, and also how wide you want it to be. Now, this would be a pretty easy wave drapery to do because it might be one big panel that covers both windows, or it might be 2 individual panels that maybe act like a center draw. You need to know that also. So when you're measuring at your customer's home, make sure that you're measuring for the actual treatment that you've agreed upon. Sometimes that's not possible because they're still kind of wishy-washy on what they want. So you may end up taking a whole bunch of measurements and making a whole bunch of notes, maybe take a picture of the window and then later decide what the treatment's exactly going to do. But trust me, if you don't take good measurements now, you've got a 99.999% chance that your treatment will not fit. So make sure you're measuring very smartly for this. Also, measure where the track is going to be. On the bottom picture, I had Roger hold his tape measure up as high as he could measure without a ladder. And we figured, well, that's close enough, right? Some of you are going, no, close enough is never close enough in our industry. You need to measure where the actual track is going to be installed because of differences with windows and drywall and impediments like trim that are around the window. that you may not have 6 or 8 inches down from the top of the window. So definitely plan on getting on that ladder and measuring appropriately. So here's our planning, some of the things that you'll need to keep in mind. Now remember, I have a 3-sided window. It's going to be a center draw. The end panels, the little 23-inch end panels, are going to be stationary. The big part of the window is going to open in the center, and I'm going to treat it with 2 panels, 2 separate panels. So you need to know where's the track going to hang so that you can figure your finished length. You need to know if it's going to be a center, a one-way draw. Maybe it's not going to be functional at all. It's just going to be a stationary drapery. Does the material have to traverse around the corner? If so, we need to really pay attention to what components you're using in the corner to make those 2 tracks fit together, because some companies will allow you to traverse around the corner. Some companies do not traverse around the corner. Are you going to use a baton, or are you going to automate this thing? So you just push a nice little button on a clicker and it moves for you. How are you going to figure out the length of the tracks? Well, I have some things for you to do that. And then what is your bracket projection? Because you need to know, especially going around corners or in bay windows, you need to know what your projection is. Otherwise, you won't know how short to cut your tracks. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, that's pretty much a picture of my window and how I measured it. Now, those of us that have been in the business for many, many years, we have something called a business card trick. And we would take 2 business cards and we would hold them up overlapping in the angle of the window, and we would draw on them so that we knew where the overlap was. And then what that angle is, we'd have to go home with a protractor and measure that angle and then figure out what our projection is, do a whole bunch of math, and kind of hope and pray that we did it correctly. Here's a problem I have with that way. I would neglect to write which way is up on my 2 business cards or my 2 index cards, or I would drop them. Or one would fly away, and somehow or other, I would end up not remembering exactly how they went together for what corner they were going in. So while that works for some people really well, and I do know some of you that still do business cards here to find out your angles, there are a couple of other tools that are available to us, and these are protractors. This is a plastic protractor that's very, very inexpensive. It is hard to get it into a corner though, so that may not be the best one. This is one by Husky that I actually like. It's kind of an automated thing where when you open it up, it tells you the angle automatically. Now it's a little bit bulky, a little bit hard to get tucked right back into the actual corner. So you may have to make some adjustments for how far this sticks out from the corner itself. But those are good ways to measure your angles or to measure your straight side bays. Here's the best way. This is called, I think this was named by the marketing department because it should be an angle measurer, right? It's called a dust plate hinge protractor, something like that. I have one right here. It is called a dust board hinge plate protractor from Rolly Company. That is a mouthful. Basically what it does is it measures the angles for you, and it's very easy to use. So notice that it has a nice sharp corner in the end, and it can go right into any angle nice and tight, and it will give you what your deduction for that particular angle should be. So for those of you that are scratching your head going, I have never seen that in their catalog, nor do I know what it is or how to use it, nor will I remember the name of it. Trust me, if you call Rolly to order this and you put in the window angle measurer, they will know what it's called. So that's from Rolly Company. First thing you need to do to use that tool is to measure a bracket projection. So you need to know how much from the middle of the track to the back of your bracket that you have. And then you're going to take your tool, leave the writing up. The writing is up. You're going to place it in your window angle, however great that angle is, open it up. And what's going to happen is that little arm that you see on the right-hand side is going to move on a pivot. So it's going to get larger or smaller. And then you want to hold that just enough so that in that angle so that you can bring it down and look at the number. And what you're looking for is that number that is in that dark black arrow. That's your angle of your window. Now you would think that we would have had a 45-degree angle on ours, but it actually ended up being 100 degrees. So that was a little bit different. Either write this number down or continue with the next step and write the next number down. So far, all we've done is writing stays up toward the ceiling, opened it up, and we're looking at where it rests when it's open on both sides. So it makes contact with the wall. So here's what it looks like when I took it back down, laid it on the table. I'm still at 100 degrees. Now I'm looking for my projection, which is 3.5 inches. And I'm going to end up with the number 3. If I follow the black arrow and my projection down until they meet, I come up with a number 3. That means that's the amount I need to subtract from any track that hits another track. You can use this for bay windows on board treatments too. Anytime a board touches another board, which would be where the angles are, right? You would subtract from both boards. If they touch each other, you subtract from both boards. So for me, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, I have 1, 2, and 3. Now my angles are a little bit different. But on number 1, I'm going to subtract 3 inches from 1 because it meets the number 2 board. On number 2, I have 2 spots where it meets another board. So I'm going to actually subtract 6 inches from that board. And on number 3, I only meet 1 time. So I'm going to subtract 3 inches from that board. Now, if this has totally confused you and you're going, oh my goodness, I should have had coffee and aspirin before we started this. You can go to Rolly Company and see a video that I did on this, and it's a lot slower, takes you through the same steps. So we're going to go over this again. Just know that my magic number for my window is to subtract 3 inches anytime a track meets another track. So here's my window measurement. I'm 166.5 across. My side windows are 23. I'm going to look at my dustboard hinge plate protractor again, and I'm going to say 3 inches. So there's where my meet, and there's where I meet. Remember, my back track meets 2 times, so I have to take 2 times the deduction off it. So 23 minus 3, I have a 20-inch track. I have 2 of those. And then 165 minus 3 on the left, minus 3 on the right is 160.5. I'm going to divide that by 2 because for me, shipping is a lot less expensive if I can have them ship 2 80.25-inch tracks rather than 1 160.5-inch track. So think about that. They make beautiful track splices that work opposite where your carriers are. So you could have this cut into multiple pieces if you want. Now, I don't think Dufix is going to cut exactly to that measurement, but what they are going to do is give you cuts so that you can trim them down to be exact what you need. So if ordering from them, I need a total of 203 inches of track. The problem is if I order 203 inches, I'm probably paying for a truck shipment for 1 track. So definitely cut down your pieces, and maybe instead of ordering 20 inches, I'm going to order 24 inches. And maybe instead of ordering 86, I'll order, or 80.5, I'll order 96-inch pieces. That gives me a little bit of leeway. I don't think my wall's going to change. I don't think my window's going to change. And I don't think my brackets are going to change. But you know, we always like that fudge factor. So be sure you order your tracks in pieces. And you also need to, when you're ordering, have them route out that little rectangle that you see in that last picture that just popped up. Each piece of track needs that little rectangle in it. That's where our carriers are going to pop in once the track is installed. So if you don't have that, you have to load your track first and then try and put it up with your drapery on it. And it's a little bit cumbersome. So make sure when you're ordering the pieces you need that fit for your type of shipment that you want. And also that each piece has that little loading rectangle cut out of it. Or put your track up there, use a pencil and mark it and cut it. There's always the old-fashioned way of doing it. But you do have to know where your brackets are still and where that first track is going to stick out from the wall. So eyeballing it, maybe not the absolute best way, but it still would get the job done. So let's figure some fullness. Before we start into all of the words on the side, I'm going to pay attention to the drawing on the bottom of this page. That is my attempt at drawing a wave drapery. So the bottom of the screen would be the wall or the window, and the top of that drawing would be going into the room. So a wave needs to start back by the wall, and then it's going to go forward and backward, however many times, and it needs to end up at the wall. So you need to know what your return's going to be. You need to know what your leading edge or your overlap is going to be. Notice the blue dots on that drawing. Those blue dots are the carriers. No matter how many waves you have 2 carriers per wave. So that means you always need an even number of carriers. Now that's going to sound very familiar for those of you that do grommet draperies, right? You always need an even number of grommets. You always need an even number of drapery of carriers. So if you were to use the Dufix tape as it is off the roll, it's going to come in 1 to 1.5 fullness, which is not really full, but it's enough to give you a good wave look. Now look at that picture and you can kind of see that first row of pockets that are closest to the bottom of the picture. There's 2 of them that are a little bit darker colored and they're slightly indented on the top and the bottom. I don't know if my cursor is going to work of course not, to be able to point to it. Those pockets that are darker are spaced at 1.5 times fullness. So if you want to use the tape as it's meant to be used, the easiest way, figure your fabric at 1.5 times fullness, of course, plus your returns, your overlap, and your side hems. And then you can just simply stick your pins in those little pockets that are the darker color pocket, hook them to your carrier, and you're done. Now, for those of you that don't want to do 1.5 times fullness, maybe you want to do 2 times or 2.5 times fullness, you're going to need to do the math. You can still use the tape and all the system that comes from Dupix, but you'll have to count your pockets. You'll have to know where to sit that pin. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that. The first thing you want to know is Dupix offers 2 different carriers on the cord. One is spaced a 1/2 inch further apart than the other. So obviously the closer your carriers, the more fabric, the more fullness. The further away your carriers, the shorter your curve and the less fabric. So measure the space between the carriers that you choose to use. You're going to multiply that number, that measurement, by your fullness number. And this fullness number is completely up to you. Now the Dupix carriers are something like 3 1/8 or 3 3/8 inches apart. I don't want to do math that hard. So I'm going to give you an example that says in some world, my carriers are 4 inches apart. So much easier math. So 4 times 2.5 is 10 inches. That means I need 10 inches of tape for every space between the 2 carriers that I have. So I just added a whole bunch of fabric because right away I was at 6.5 inches. Now I'm at 10 inches. And remember, that's going to make my folds deeper to the front and the back because I'm adding more fabric. So step number 3, if I take that measurement of 10 inches and I divide by the space between the carriers, I'm just working it backwards again, round it up to an even number. That's the number of carriers that I need. That's important to know, the number of carriers that you need. Then the last step is multiply your carrier number by the amount of tape. That'd be my 10 inches. Add for my returns, my overlaps, my side hems, and that's the amount of fabric that I need. Sounds very, very familiar to figuring yardage, just the way we normally figure yardage for a pattern repeat, doesn't it? So take the space between your carriers, multiply it by your fullness, take that number, divide it by that space between your carriers again, round it up. Multiply that number by the amount of tape you figured out in number 2, add your hems and your returns, and that's how much fabric you need. So not real difficult to do, but this is in your handout in case you don't want to take notes to write it down, or if it made complete sense to you, then we're good to go. This is using the tape as it's meant to be used with the carriers that I have at 1.5 fullness. I do have to talk just very shortly about railroading fabric. I know a lot of you have been sewing for many years and you probably know railroading left and right. I do have a few new people on this webinar, so here we go. Railroading simply means that we're going to turn our fabric so that the length becomes the width and the width becomes the length. I love the picture on this slide because typically we only railroad for upholstery so that the stripes can go up and down with no weird look on your couch. But we also railroad shears because shears tend to come 118 inches wide. So that can become our length. You can do anything 118 minus your header minus your hem, you can get out of that railroaded shear. So take the width of your fabric that you need from your last slide when you did the math, divide it by your width of fabric that you have, round up to a full number, and that's the number of widths that you need. So pretty easy to figure once you remember to take your fabric and turn it sideways. We're going to be railroading our shear so I don't have any joint seams, and that gives us one width, but I don't know how much yardage I need. I don't know how many yards I need to get to that width. So take your total number of inches that you need for your width times the number of panels that you're doing, divide that number by 36 will give you the yards that you need. You'll notice when we start to roll out the fabric for this particular project, we have a lot of shear. I don't know how we figured our yardage for this, but we have enough to make 2 complete treatments instead of just 1. So we're going to take our finished length plus our header and hem becomes your cut length. And I'll talk about your header amount in a bit. And then the finished length for this track, you have to remember that it comes from the bottom of the track. So when you're measuring ceiling to floor, you not only have to take the deduction for the depth of the track, but you need to add 1/8 of an inch to that so that your fabric doesn't rub right on the track itself. So you're going to have ceiling to floor minus the depth of your track, minus 1/8, minus the clearance you want on the floor. That's going to be your finished length. So let's plan the layout for this one. What I'm doing is I've done all that math to figure out how many carriers I need, and I'm using the pre-assigned pocket for my fullness. So now I just need to start with my return, find my first pocket, start with my return, which is half a fold for me. And I'm doing math in my head, that's why I look so confused. And then I'm counting out the pockets that I need. I know how many carriers, 1 carrier per favorite pocket, therefore I'm just counting them out. And it just keeps going and going and going because it seems like this is a really, really long treatment. They're a little hard to see because it's a clear tape on a white table. But once I get to my last pocket, from that last pocket, I can add for my return or my leading edge. Now mine are the same, so I didn't have to remember separate math. And there's 1 piece of tape that I need for one of my drapery. Remember, I'm making 2 drapery. So I need to cut 2 of these. I could measure it all out again and do the math again, or I can just match them up, which is the faster way. So my starting point for my second tape probably won't match exactly. You may have a little bit of waste, but match up those pockets. I'm just trimming off the excess on my second piece. And now you'll notice I'm going to start holding it up to the light so I can see those pockets a little bit better. And I'm just eyeballing it to match the pockets up. Not going to count again. So for those of you that are making 12 drapery panels that are exactly the same using this method, you're going to have to cut 12 pieces of this tape. And once I have my tapes cut, I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to measure it for my fabric that I need just to check all my math. So I started out measuring on 36s and couldn't do the math in my head. So I went to 50s. So I have 156, I think it came out to, inches of fabric that I need widthwise per panel, plus my side hems 3 inches on each side. So that plus 6.
162 inches of fabric. 162-inch wide piece of railroaded shear.
We had a good time trying to remember all the math for that. So obviously write that down because that's what your cut's going to be for your cut shear, your width. And if you're like me, as soon as I wrote it down, I started double guessing myself on, well, did I add the right number of carriers? Did I do the right math? Did I cut my tape correctly? So I went back over on my paper and wrote down exactly what my measurements were, divided by my carrier space, figured out one more time on a clean piece of paper that yes, I did have the right number of carrier holes. I did have the right for my return and for my leading edge, and I added the fabric for my hems, so I'm good to go. So 166, 23, 23, 23. I'm going to divide my 166 by 2 because I'm going to do one panel that goes from the center of this window all the way around the corner. That's going to give me 160 inches and a quarter. I'm going to add then for my 3 inches for my side hems, 3 inches for the other side hem, 166.25. Now notice I've kind of rounded up, if for those of you that can do math really quick in your head, this 54 was actually 53.125 or something like that. So I've already added in a little bit extra fabric. So I'm good with if I just cut 166, I really don't need that 1/4 inch of fabric. But for the purists that are listening, you definitely want to pay attention to your decimals and make sure that you're counting exactly what you need. So cutting the width of the fabric, this is going to be cutting 2 at the same time. I'm leaving it folded. I've clamped down the one side, the bottom of one side. I don't really care about the other side if it lays perfectly flat or not, because I'm never going to cut across all this without doing the trick for shears first. So clamping as I go at the same length. And I figured out how many times I need to come up and down the table to get to the width that I need. And there's my fold back. So one person can do this. It's just easier with 2. Again, I don't care about the right side of the table because I'm only going to mark the left side. Here's all my folds. So I need to find my middle fold. And I'm going to make a snip in one of those pieces, not on both sides, just in one, about 1 inch long. And then I need to cut the top fold because that's where I'm done with my fabric. If this is confusing and it's not something that you've done thousands of times before, roll out your length that you need, but you only care about one side. Make a small cut, roll out your next one, make a small cut. There's a reason we're not cutting all the way across, just sight unseen. That's because with a shear, you need to pull a thread to be able to get a straight cut. So here's how you pull that thread. Usually you'll end up with 3 or 4 threads from that first cut. So you need to find one. And then just keep working it across. Now we have to go 118 inches with this. So I'm going to show you what happens if your thread breaks. See that little line that it leaves by pulling that one thread? That's the line that you cut on. What you need to make sure you're doing is just cutting the one layer. Don't cut more than one layer. So here's our bottom, very first time that we're doing this. Getting to one thread. It's probably the toughest part of all this is just pulling the one thread. Might take a little finagling to get to it. It doesn't matter which one you use either. And once you have your one thread, hold on to that and just start shearing that shear up. Go as far as you can. It's no worries if the thread breaks, but if you feel you need to break this thread to start over again, I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. So I'm going as far as I'm comfortable with. I'm going to hold on to where I'm done gathering and just pull those 2 pieces apart and it will break that one thread for you. And then when you lay it back out, I know it's very hard to see because it's white on white, but you do have a cut line that you can follow now. Make sure your scissors are nice and sharp. You haven't been cutting metal or paper with them recently because you do want a nice clean cut on this. And what we're doing is we're just evening out the very first cut so that I can then start doing any kind of measuring that I need. So technically my slides are backwards from each other because you want to even out your bottom first and then lay out your fabric. Then you just pick that thread out again and keep going all the way across until you meet the other side. So we have a good bottom to start. We can now lay out that fabric and cut all the widths that we need. Now you have a selvage on this. You have a top and a bottom selvage. We only care about the top selvage right now because we haven't cut our lengths yet. So we're going to take and cut that selvage off. It is not included in your 118, so you don't have to worry about losing any type of the fabric, but we don't want to turn that into our header because it would show as a darker line all the way across the treatment. So just keep bringing it down and cut that selvage off. Again, nice, clean, sharp scissors, going to make this fast work of it, and you're done with it. Don't worry about the bottom. You can do that when you do the hem. And then we're going to add fusible buckram. Now, this is an optional step, like I said. But the buckram that I'm going to use is Dufix fusible buckram. It's got a very low tack to it. What's nice about using it with shear is it kind of sticks to both sides of the shear, so you don't have anything wiggling around on you. So to do this, I've got the top of my fabric where I need it. I've taken my buckram and I'm actually laying it on the table 3 inches short, or whatever your return is, short of the table. And that way, when I lay the fabric along the outside of the table, I have non-buckrammed side hems. Just check things again, make sure they didn't move. There's my 3 inches. And then you want to be careful enough with this that you are lining the top of your fabric cut with the top of the buckram. Now the buckram has a gooey side and a non-gooey side. You want the gooey side up to your fabric, not down to your table, because otherwise you're going to be permanently putting it on your table. And I am not going to make you sit here and watch me iron all of this buckram on. So we're going to fade out and pretty quickly and go out to the last part of this. Just know that I kept moving things down the table, lining the buckram up with the top of the shear and using the Dufix iron on this. Now you don't technically need a Dufix iron. You can use any iron that will put out a good amount of steam. And then just keep moving it down. Now you notice I've taken the buckram and I've thrown it over the edge of the table so that it stays flat. That was a little trick that I picked up years ago. If you only want to do 20 inches or so at a time, that's completely up to you. If you have another set of hands on the opposite end of the table, you might be able to do the entire width of the table at one time. It is pretty vital that you don't have any shear hanging over your buckram because it will show when you go to turn your double header. And since our shear doesn't have a front or a back, I didn't have to worry about putting this on the back of the fabric. You get a good facial if you're doing a buckram from Dufix because all that steam comes off that iron and just fogs up your glasses nice for you so you can't see and gives you a good facial. It will slightly come through to the table, but not enough to leave any problems. And then on the end, I want to cut my buckram even to begin with. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to measure my 3 inches for my side hem and take that off the buckram. If you want to pre-plan, you can always measure and cut your buckram beforehand, completely up to you. But I like the idea of that buckram being over the end of the table because then gravity keeps it nice and straight for me as I'm working with it. And then finish the iron. Oh, my dog is having a nightmare in the background. I hope you can't hear her. She's barking at herself. Lily, Lily. Sorry about that. Now what I want to do is I want to turn this over so that I can get my first fold in. Just kind of scratching or walking that shear so that I have a really nice fold on the top. And I'm going to iron that down. That little bit of sticky that's left from your fusible buckram is now going to stick to this part also. So it gives you a really nice header all the way down. We're going to go kind of fast on that because that's pretty boring to watch. Now what I need to do is turn it one more time. So to do that, instead of turning it under and trying to keep track of everything, I simply flip the whole thing over. So now I have a double header, just like any standard panel that you're going to make. All I'm doing is lining up again so that I have a nice clean edge on the top, a clean edge on the bottom, and one more final press on it. So for those of you that have already told me that you're going to be using an embroidered shear for this, there's a lot of steam going in to get that buckram to adhere. So you may want to test your fabric first to make sure, one, it's color safe, and two, that you can actually fold it for a crisp top if you've got that embroidery on the top of it. This one's pretty easy because I'm just pushing up the buckram into the fold, and then I'm going to be good to go. Probably the easiest step of all of them. Now again, completely optional. If you choose not to put buckram in, just fold in your double 4 header and you're good to go. Or double 3 1/2, whatever your tape is. So we've got our header done. And what I've done is I've come to the table and I've taped off where my cut length is. Very important that you put a mark on the blue tape to know which side to cut on, because if you're doing multiples of these, it can get real easy to cut on the wrong side of that tape. So if you look up at the top of the table, there's a blue tape that my ironed in buckram is going to lay right next to. And then on the bottom of the table is another piece of blue tape that tells me which side to cut on to get to the cut that I need. Now this is my cut length plus my bottom hem because I've not turned my hem in yet. This is easier with 2 people. Notice that I've clamped one side to the table. 99% laid out flat is perfectly fine. You have a whole bunch of forgiveness with shears, whole bunch of forgiveness. So I'm going to start by cutting on the side of the tape I'm supposed to cut on. Notice that my excess fabric is still up on the table. I'm not letting it fall down to pull the drapery down. And then I'm going to borrow another set of hands and I'm just going to shift it all the way across the table and do that all over again, however many times it takes to be able to get the entire length cut. Now remember, we have 2 panels to do. I'm not going to show you the second panel. What I'm doing is I'm starting my next pin down where my first one stopped. And then keep cutting. Just remember that excess shear that's going to hang off the bottom of the table needs to stay up on your table so that it doesn't pull and give you a wavy cut. Now I could have marked this and I could have tried to pull a thread, but I'm going opposite the grain of the weave right now. So it's going to be easier just to cut it on a straight line than to try and pull a thread. And then you get to do that all over again. So we're going to fast forward through that. And I'm going to show you how I did the end. Instead of moving it a 4th time and going through all that again, if you only have a little bit left over, you can do the trick that I'm going to do. And that is just to fold it back. Just check at the top that you haven't pulled that fabric down. So you're still checking the top is laying flat, the fabric is laying flat, and then you can go ahead and cut that little bit off. So we now have our width cut to what we need. We know the number of carriers that we're going to do. We know how long our track is going to be. We've finished our top with buckram. Now it's ready to put in and cut the bottom length. Now it's ready to put our actual tape on. Now the Do-Fix tape is less wide than our full 4-inch header. So we're going to have a little bit stuck underneath of buckram. It's not quite as wide as our buckram. So if you wanted to, you could match the size of your tape to the size of your buckram. But one thing you need to remember is that tape must be set 1/4 inch down from the top of your drapery. If it's not set 1/4 inch down, it will rub on the carriers and it will be in the wrong position and you're going to have the wrong length. Now, let me open up chat while we're here. I've got a few coming in. Oh, blue tape on the table. Yeah, I love painter's tape. I can't tell you how many rolls I have in the workroom. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm using a quilter's ruler. I've just pinned out my side hem. I have a flat line for my buckram that's already in, and I'm measuring 1/4 inch down before I place my tape on it. Now this tape is also fusible. So just a couple of pins in here will keep it in place. It is a low-tack fuse though. Do not trust this tape without sewing it on. It will come off. So it's low tack enough to keep it in place until you can get to your sewing machine. Just measuring that same 1/4 inch down. Now that quilter's ruler that you see, love those. If you don't have one already, go get one. Go to the sewing department in any retail store or quilting store, and they're going to have these rulers. They're marked at 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch, and it makes super easy, super fast work of trying to set something. So if you notice, my tape is a 1/4 inch down from the top of my buckram, and I have extra buckram underneath the tape. Again, it's optional to use the buckram. So if you don't use it, you may want to just fold your header the width of your tape plus a 1/4 inch for your double folds. And then when you get those on, you can take your pins out and start pinning, probably toward the middle of your tape. And that way, when you sew it on, you'll have 2 stitch lines for this particular method. You can pin in the middle of the tape because you won't be sewing there. You can pin at the bottom. Completely up to you as to how you want to remove your pins or not while you're sewing. And we're just going to keep going and keep going and keep going. So I thought that this had been taken out of the video. So my apologies that you get to see me do the whole header. I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. And pinning. And the last little bit. So please remember that everything from Dufix in this particular project is a low tack fusible. You do need to sew something in. Okay, so I'm pinning with my pins toward the top of the buckram. That way when I sew, I can pull them out very quickly. Will the wave tape pins snap into the carriers on a custom traverse rod, or do you? I don't know, Lisa. I really don't know. She's asking, will the wave tape pins snap into carriers on a custom traverse rod? I don't think they will, because these pins have a special top that go into the specialty part of the carrier from Dufix. So you would probably have to replace the entire carrier to use this part of the Dufix system. That's why I say, if you're going to choose a company, choose all the components from that company. So as you see, I'm going to get one side sewing done, and then I'm going to put it all back in my lap, and I'm going to do the other side. So we're sewing the top and the bottom of that tape on. Now this is hard to see. I will tell you, I think Susan's favorite saying is, it's like watching a polar bear in a snowstorm. That's very much what this was like. It's a clear tape on white sheer, and I couldn't have the light on because it disrupts the filming. So it was very much a leap of faith for me I didn't know what I was sewing, to tell you the truth. So keep the light on your machine when you're sewing this. The other thing I need to tell you is, when you put the tape on, you want that specialty pocket to be up. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. So things to remember, and a little bit of a close-up, you can see on the picture on the left, I'm a 1/4 inch down from the top of my header. My specialty pocket is toward the top, 1/4 inch down. My tape starts inside the side hem. My hem's going to fold over the edge of that tape, so don't worry about if it's kind of a yucky cut. It's going to be covered up. And my first pocket is my first pin. And that's why when I measured my tape out, I measured my return, and then my first pocket came in. So you can see the difference from when you iron it on, it's a little bit crisp, but as it cools down, it gets just a little bit softer for you to work with. And I do have a top and bottom seam on that. So basically the hardest part about doing a wave drapery is the math. And it's not hard at all if you choose to use one person system or one company system, and you choose to do the fullness that the tape mandates. Otherwise, we just pick a pocket, and I'll show you that. So here's a no buckram style. I'm going to measure the depth of the tape. I'm going to turn under a double fold. That's the tape depth plus 1/4 inch. So say it's 3.5 plus 1/4 inch. So each one of those folds needs to be 3 3/4. Now, again, I don't know whose tape you're going to use, so you'll have to measure your actual tape, add that 1/4 inch, and then go ahead and place it on. You can fold under, and you can put your tape on all in one fell swoop if you so choose. I would really be terrible at that, because something would move on me and I wouldn't get a nice clean fold. So I tend to do my double fold header first, then put my tape on, iron it, and then stitch it. I'm going to show you something different when we do this one, because we're not going to have 2 stitch lines on it. So I've done my math, put my tape on. And this one I'm pinning a little bit differently. I'm pinning in the middle of the tape rather than on the bottom because I do not want to remove these pins while I'm sewing. I'm going to do one stitch line. So if you're customers that want this style but really don't want to see those 2 stitch lines on it, first one's the same stitch we've done before. It's the very top. I'm sewing the top of the tape, not into the pockets. I know, still very hard to see on the video. Then I'm going to come back, and instead of sewing there, so I have a double stitch line, I'm going to open this up. Now the pins are going to be down. They're facing down toward my machine. And all I'm doing is I'm going to be stitching the tape to the fold of the shear. I'm not stitching through all the layers now. It still keeps my tape in place, still keeps all my folds in place. Everything is secure. I just end up with 1 stitch line on the top instead of 2. I will tell you that your machine might get a little bit gunked up because you're sewing through an iron-on or a fusible product. Make sure that you've got a nice clean machine needle in. And now you can take your pins out. And what it's going to do is only give you 1 stitch line. Now it's a sheer, it's white thread, it probably doesn't show anyway because it's hung up high in a window. But I just think it's a little cleaner. It doesn't have any excess buckram on it, so it's a little bit looser of a fold. 1 stitch line, but yet everything's nice and tight in there. So this is my preferred method of how to do it. I don't really like the 2 stitch lines because, as you know, sometimes things can walk on you and you get those little puckers when you hang it up. I don't like those little puckers when it folds to the front or to the back. So I like the 1 stitch line better. So here's what we did today. We measured the window opening and I walked you through how to do your corner windows or your bay windows if you have that for a project. We figured your track width by deducting what you need to deduct if, again, you're using a corner or a bay window. If you're just using a flat window, you don't need to do any of those deductions. We planned and cut the fabric that was railroaded for 2 different panels. I showed you how to pull a thread to be able to get a straight line, and then how to multiple fold and cut to get your 2 cuts. Finished our header with the Do-Fix wave tape, the Do-Fix iron-on or fusible buckram, and I showed you 2 ways to stitch it down. So we're not quite done with our panel. What we're going to do in the next one is a lot of intricate little things. And I figured if I finish the panel today, some of you might not come back because the next one's all about the track. That's not the fun part. So next time we're going to finish the bottom hem, put a bead weight chain in it, sausage weight, or some people call it a roll weight tape. We're going to use that. Oh, I have a typo in here. We're going to finish the side hems. I'm going to do an additional way to figure your pin placement. So if the math was a little cloudy for you today, I'm going to show you how to figure it the same way you would figure grommets. And then I'm going to show you how to figure it just doing this separate math. Just this is what I have. This is what I'm going to do. We're going to specify out the track system from Do-Fix that is not only in your class starter kit that you can order, but also additional components that you might need if you're doing some type of fancy window. We're going to assemble the track, the carriers, the pins. We're going to install it, which is a whole 5 minutes. I mean, literally on a ladder, 5 minutes, this thing was installed. It was wonderful. I'm going to slightly touch on the best use of the track and the weights that the track can take. And then I'm going to go over the starter kit that you can order from Do-Fix, as well as pricing. So we have a lot to cover in the next class. Hopefully you've got a little bit under your belt now on how to figure your yardage and stuff. And if you want to start playing around, you can always do something out of a scrap. And then if you order your kit from Do-Fix, you can start making samples. So thanks for attending today. I don't have any more questions that are coming in. I am recording today, so I'll send the recording link out to you probably in a couple hours. It takes a little while for it to download and change formats for me so that I can get it up on the website for you. So my email's on the bottom of the screen if you have questions before next week. Otherwise, I will see you in 1 week. Have a good week. Got one more chat came in. Oh, we're good. Okay. Here we go.